I have been working in the hospital for about 10 years, so I have a good understanding of the role of social work and some of the financial entitlements that you may be entitled to. So I'm going to give you a bit of a whirlwind tour. By no means am I the expert in this. Every budget, there is a change. Every single budget in the last 5 years, there has been a change to the entitlements and benefits that Irish people are entitled to. So we'll go through them as best we can. The first thing is just to explain a little bit about social work. Our role is we work with individuals, families and groups within their social context. So people from all different areas of life. And our aim is to provide a service to clients and families where illness, medical care and treatment are complicated by social and emotional problems. People come into hospital, they come in dressed in their clothes, and then they come into hospital, they get into their pajamas, they're feeling unwell, they're vulnerable, and they can feel more exposed, more emotional. Lots of things happen when you come into hospital. You're not in your comfort zone. You're in a totally new environment where people are talking at you in lots of ways and not always talking with you. So a part of our role is to make sure that you feel comfortable here, that what you're feeling and your thoughts are being heard and communicated throughout the MDT, so throughout everyone that's working with you in the hospital. So what is chronic illness? Chronic illness is such a massive thing, and just from my experience in CF, one of the biggest challenges around chronic illness can actually about how do I balance my quality of life without allowing my illness take over and become the whole of me and changing my identity. That's the biggest challenge for anyone with a chronic illness. Do you become COPD or do you stay Mary and actually a part of my life is COPD, and it does impact my quality of life, but it isn't my whole life. I have this whole other piece of me that was before illness and that will be after illness too in lots of ways. I quite like this diagram because I think it does take in who we are as people, that we're not just one entity, that we are body, mind and spirit, as you can see from the 3 circles, but we all exist in context. So we all come into hospital, or we all are people with a history. So a little bit what Jenny was saying there, our family history, our relationships, communications, expectations, family needs, they all impact how we take on illness, how we process the information of a diagnosis, how we are as people, what our belief system is, so important. Do we know anyone else with the same illness? How did they respond? What was it like for them? Our body, what's physically changed for us? What's our medical condition? And a little bit about what we're going to go through today, the socio-economic policies that impact illness. When we are working full-time, we have not plenty of money, but some money in the bank. Illness comes into our lives, our financial situation changes, it can be incredibly stressful because you don't know, are you going to be able to continue and function in the same way? So what do we do in medical social work? Well, when you come into hospital, if you come into hospital, we would start a psychosocial assessment, which is basically an assessment of how you're coping, how are things going for you, what your interpretation of illness is, what your family's is, which is often very different, just to note that. You could feel a certain way and your family might expect something different from you because they have seen you as mum and dad functioning a certain way. That can often cause difficulties. It's how you balance your expectation with your children's expectations of what you can and can't do. Also your community supports. Have you been linked in with anyone in the community? Have you ever met your public health nurse? Have you ever been down to your health centre? Do they know who you are? Do you see your GP often? Do they know who you are? Are you able to cook and clean for yourself? Have you ever been linked in with home help organisations or Meals on Wheels or whatnot? So we would go through all of that in a psychosocial assessment. We would also look at your emotional support. Who are your big supports? Some people would mention, I go to Mass once a week. That is a huge support and an outlet for me. Other people would say, look, I've got like 9 kids. They're all fantastic. They call in, on a rota basis. Other people would have great friends. A part of it, of the work we do, would also be around making sure that you have a safe discharge, making sure that when you go home, that everything you need will be there for you, all within community restraints, but to the best of our ability that you be safely discharged home. Part of our role is around advocating for what you might need when you go home. the financial rights, which I'll go through. Crisis intervention. Crisis intervention is when you may come into hospital and something bad has happened to make you come into hospital, and that we might be able to intervene in some way to make things a bit more comfortable. Counselling, that's a part of our role as well. In my particular job, I'm the bereavement coordinator, so I meet 10 to 12 people a week for individual counselling. Carer support. Don't underestimate the role of being a carer. It is one of the most stressful things you could ever do in your life, is be a carer. It's an incredibly stressful thing. It's something that a lot of people fall into. It happens quite naturally. Other people make a conscious decision to leave work and become a carer. We totally underestimate the role of the carer in this country. The amount of money it saves for the exchequer each year is in the billions. And a lot of times people come into hospital because the carer is exhausted, absolutely exhausted, and needs a little bit of help. So if you ever do become a carer, or if someone in your family is thinking about becoming a carer, it's a huge decision. It needs to be talked about really openly. Just put it on the line. Do you want to do this? Can you do this? You know, do you feel facilitated to do this? How are you going to support yourself in caring? Huge. People just go into it and they think they don't need support. I think everyone needs to go into counselling if they're going to be a long-term carer. Discharge planning can be quite complex. You know, if you were sick in hospital 5 years ago, your discharge plan would be very different to what it is now. You know, we would have been able to, make sure that people stayed and remained at home for as long as possible. That's harder now. We are relying more on families to take up more of the support, and there are more limited resources in the community in terms of home help, home care packages. A medical card is a really useful thing to have if you have a chronic illness. I'm really glad that there's been more of a communal yes to having a medical card than no. Medical cards have also been another resource that has been attacked of late. I'm sure you've seen it in the media. But it's there's been a bit of change in the last couple of months. But it's about accessing your family doctor. The GP is expensive. Community health services, dental services, hospital care, and a range of other benefits. If you come into hospital, there is a cost if you don't have a medical card. So just to be mindful of that. It's topped at €750 a year for a hospital annual year. So how do you apply? They've made it easier to apply. So you apply on medicalcard.ie, and applications can be submitted online. Apparently you're approved within 15 days. That's not really my experience of that, but that's what the aim is. Once you have one, that's really, really good. You can be annually reviewed for your medical card. The most important thing, if you have one and you get an application renewal, is to get a very strong medical letter outlining your condition. If you are coming into hospital, get it from the consultant or signed from the consultant. If you have a good relationship with your GP, make sure your GP outlines it, what's going on and what medication you're on, the impact it's having on your life. If you don't have a medical card and you are thinking of applying for one, it's a more lengthy process. All of your outgoings, every outgoing you have, rent, mortgage, house insurance, car tax, everything needs to be listed, and you need to make it very clear on the phone and on the form, and then also have documentary evidence proving your rent, your mortgage, your house insurance, your car tax, everything needs to be submitted. If one page goes missing, they send the form back. If you have somebody to support you in making an application, a social worker either in the community or in the hospital, use that person. So you have to just be savvy and relentless and keep going. The amount of people over 70 who lost their medical card was unbelievable. And actually it's only now we're seeing that group of people who gave back or handed back or sent back their medical card really needing it and having to fight very hard to get it back. So that was from the budget in 2008, and it came in 2009, so that over 70s are subject to a means test. One of the biggest things that's upsetting about that particular application is savings. So people who would have worked very hard over their lives and would have saved a little bit, they'd be very worried about saying, oh, I've this much in my savings account. You can have up to €33,000 that isn't means tested. Anything above that is taken into the means test. Some people would have more than that saved and would be very nervous about disclosing that. Some people have it sitting in their current account and would be nervous about showing that bank statement. It is confidential and it is managed appropriately, but just to be mindful of that 33,000. There's two different applications. There's the MC1, which is for people under 70, and the MC1A for over 70s. The application can be submitted on medical grounds, and that's what I would be suggesting for everybody in this room, that your application is actually being submitted on medical grounds. So it's sent to the administrator. You could fail financially, you could be over the means, and then it's sent to a medical officer who then looks at it and says, is this person's medical condition valid enough to be granted a medical card? And with COPD, it would be. We also have a link from the hospital where we can fast track some applications. So use the resources here. GP visit card allows you to attend the GP for free. It's a similar application to the medical card. With a lot of people, they've taken the medical card off them and issued a GP card. So you might be over the financial means, but they issue you with a GP card. The income guidelines are higher than the medical card. They give an allowance for rent, mortgage and childcare. The medical card assessment is done first, then you're automatically assessed for a GP visit card. And income is assessed after tax and PRSI are deducted, and they can also be granted on medical grounds. Drugs payment scheme, another scheme that has changed in the last few years. It used to be an allowance of €120, it's now €144 a month for approved prescribed drugs, medicines and certain appliances. Disability allowance, this is a difficult enough one to explain, but disability allowance is a weekly payment to people who are 16 years and over. So you must have an injury, disease or physical or mental disability that has continued and expected to last beyond a year. And it can take a number of months to get an answer from disability. So the disability allowance section is in Longford, and it takes, I think, something like between 16 and 22 weeks to get an answer. If you need disability and you have no other source of income, that's a long time to wait with no money at all. It's €188 a week. For people who have made and submitted an application for disability, your PPS number is screened, and that you can get an interim payment from your community welfare officer in your local health centre if you are awaiting disability. With disability allowance, you are sent for medical assessment into town. It used to be in Delir Street, I'm not sure if it's still there, where you stand in front of 3 people from the medical profession and they determine whether you are disabled or not. I have a big problem with that on an ethical basis because I've had a lot of patients who've been really, really sick and actually too sick to go in and sit in front of a board of 3 people and say, I'm sick, it's quite visible, I'm not well, I can't be here. People going in on concentrators, oxygen dependent, making the trip into town, etc. Really, really difficult. If that happens to you and you're physically not able to attend, you need to get somebody to advocate on your behalf. So a social worker, your GP, one of the girls from the team would make that phone call for you, but don't not communicate, don't just not turn up because they'll cut you off straight away. This is getting harder to get, this particular allowance. They're getting more stringent. They are, essentially people working in admin, they don't know the face of the illness, they don't know what it's like, they're processing applications slowly, and it can be helpful to have someone making a phone call, checking in on where the application is at. The means test. So there are 2 different, there's disability benefit for people who have PRSI contributions and have been working, and there's disability allowance for people who don't have PRSI contributions and haven't been working. The means test is similar to the medical card, in and around the 33,000 in savings. If you are expected to be off work for more than a year, disability benefit is the way to go if you've been working, and disability allowance if you haven't been working. So people who are rejected for disability allowance, it's technically because they're saying you're able to work. So you would be on job seekers benefit or job seekers allowance at that point. If you're on job seekers, then you have to attend for interviews or courses. But if you're not able physically, you have to reapply for disability and make an argument. At the back of the disability allowance form, there is a medical report. There's a tick the box form. I should have brought the form. And it goes through whether you are physically able to work or not. If your doctor knows you and you have a good relationship with your doctor, they should be able to identify all of those areas. And then you should be technically approved for disability. The medical report is so important in this application. Really, really important. So get someone that knows you to fill it out, not someone you've met for 2 minutes on a ward round. So disability allowance and work. Some people are on disability allowance and work for rehabilitative purposes. So that's for the quality of life piece that I talked about, and that, you know, it helps them to continue to work in some capacity. If your doctor is saying, I would like you to continue to work in some capacity in some way, you can work up to between 15 and 20 hours a week. And you can earn up to €120 per week without your disability allowance being affected. So disability allowance is $188 per week. So there you can see the 50% of your earnings between $120 and $350 will not be taken into account in the disability allowance means test, and any earnings over €350 per week is fully assessed as income in the means test. That's where you apply, our lovely friends in Longford. Illness benefit is the other benefit we talked about, and that's for people who have PRSI contributions. One of the things about your PRSI contributions, which isn't widely known, is it's now 2014. They go back on your contributions in 2012. They look at your contributions from 2 years previous to the time you made the application. So if you were working full-time in 2012, then you will be deemed suitable for illness benefit. So you have to have 104 weeks PRSI paid, so that's 2 years. And that is in Dublin, that application. Carers allowance. It's a payment for anyone in Ireland who's looking after someone because of physical or mental difficulties. It's not payable to everyone. There has to be a valid reason. You can apply to care for up to 2 people at a time. There are a number of conditions. You have to be living within a certain mile radius. The person that you're caring for has to be of a certain capacity to require care. That's where you apply to that. That's the same guys in Longford. Carers benefit. This is important for anyone who's in full-time work now and thinking about becoming a carer. You can apply to your employer to become a carer. They have to hold your job for you. The same position that you leave is the same position you go back to when your caring period is over. And again, it's for 2 years. And actually employers are usually very good because it's in law that they have to provide it. The supplementary welfare allowance is that application that I talked about, that if you don't get disability and you're waiting in the interim for the application to come through, you make an application supplementary welfare allowance, and that's with your local community welfare officer. That's not an easy thing to go and apply for. You have to queue up in your local health office, you have to wait, you have to explain. I suppose people don't often feel like they've been heard in those sorts of circumstances, and sometimes you can have a feeling that you're going cap in hand, and that's a horrible sensation, a horrible feeling. The respite care grant is made to anyone who requires a grant to pay for respite care if someone wants to go into a nursing home or a facility for a couple of weeks if you were going on holidays and caring for someone, and that's where you apply for that. All right, thanks very much.